Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's session. It's going to be a quick 20-minute webinar, and I hope that it's beneficial for everyone. The topic here is Once Upon a Time, Engaging a Narrative to Present Data. So before we get into the content, I just want to acknowledge here that Reach with Speech acknowledges that its office is in Edmonton, which is located on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional land of the First Nation and Métis people. So we only have 20 minutes or so, which is not too much time. So it's going to be a packed agenda. And I really hope that you're all able to leave with some actionable takeaways. And for your next presentation, you are able to incorporate some of these components with regards to storytelling and data. So we're going to look at what is a story, who is your audience, the importance of data validation, types of stories, key components and best practices. And as well, I want to mention that please mute yourself. And if you have any questions, you can type them into the chat box and we will address them at the end of the session. As well, if you're feeling comfortable, you can unmute yourself at the end and then ask a question at the end of the presentation. So just a little bit about myself. I work professionally as an OT, and I also have an associate designation in speech and drama. I used to work at the Speech Studio, and I'm also the founder of Reach with Speech. So on the bottom corner of my slide, you can see the website there, reachwithspeech.com, where you can see my services. I also have quite a few articles there as well. So if you have some time, please poke around. I also offer public speaking coaching, communication coaching services, presentation and pitch coaching, and conflict resolution workshops. So if you're interested, certainly get in touch. So before we get started on the main content, I'd like to ask, how is everyone checking in today? And if you'd like, you can share your response in the group chat. So I'll go first. I'm feeling joyful and excited. And while you share in the group chat here how you're checking in, I'd like to highlight what this tool actually is. It's called a feeling wheel, and it's a really good tool to use to see how you're feeling in the moment. It allows you to check in with yourself and improves your self-awareness, which is a significant part of communication. And it can be an indicator if you need to take a moment for yourself or do some deep breathing exercises. And I would even say if you're in a small group setting, if you want your audience to feel engaged and feel heard, you could possibly use this tool. So just something that I thought I would share. Okay, so let's get into the main content of storytelling and data. Firstly, what is a story? So a story is the telling of an event, either true or fictional, in such a way that the listener experiences or learns something just by the fact that they heard the story. People are more likely to remember stories, and stories evoke an emotion from the audience. If you go back to your time at grade school, when describing a story, you can think of who, what, when, where, why, and how. And think about that for a moment, because we're going to come back to that. So when someone hears a story, multiple parts of the brain are engaged. That includes different structures in the brain, like the Wernicke's area, which controls language comprehension, the amygdala, which is involved in processing emotional response, and neurons in your brain that are all interconnected, and they certainly play a role in communicating with one another and in your empathy as well. So as an audience member, when different areas of your brain are engaged, the hippocampus, which is involved in storing short-term memories, is more likely to convert those short-term memories into long-term memories. So you really want your audience to remember key takeaways. So how do you do that? Firstly, is you have to start with the audience. The world is a busy place. The audience is likely multitasking. So you really have to ask, why should your audience care? What is in it for the audience? How will you change your audience? And what are 3 to 5 takeaways you want to leave with your audience? And I would say you really only have 3 to 5 takeaways. As I mentioned, the world is a busy place. Everybody is multitasking. There's so many things that people are involved with. So if you can try to limit those key takeaways, it will be beneficial for your presentation. After asking, who the audience is and what your goals are with respect to, what you want your audience to learn, the next question is with regards to the data validation piece. So have you ensured that your data is valid and credible? And if possible, if you're able to hold a data validation study first, this will get that question out of the way in terms of, is your data credible? Because the last thing you want is you don't want to be in a position where you're trying to tell a story about your data and now you're in the defense and you're trying to defend your data. So if you're able to hold a validation and understanding session to get that credibility question out of the way, then this avoids the audience questioning the data. And I would also say that you want to avoid being too technical so that you're able to focus on the storytelling part. The audience, they need to know that the data is relevant, current, and accurate. So if the data is, not valid, then what are some of the risks that happens when you don't share data effectively? So think about that for a moment. And I can think of maybe the audience, they don't know what to focus on. There's confusion about the next steps. They're questioning things. It takes longer to yield insights, which leads to delayed in decision making. Maybe the next steps are not clear. They're not able to flesh out the data and have conversations about the data, which delays more decision making. So if these things are not possible, then that leads to increased time and increased costs. So you want to find a way where you're able to yield insights efficiently and effectively in order to get to that decision-making part quickly. So I want to share different types of stories you can tell with the data. So on the left-hand side, you can see just general types of stories, overcoming the monster, rags to riches, the quest, voyage and return, comedy, tragedy, rebirth. I'm sure you can think of numerous, books or movies or TV shows that have those overarching themes. With data, there's also stories you can tell. And having, the hard skills of data analysis are not enough. It's not enough to engage and inspire. So you need to be able to communicate insights in a clear, compelling manner. Here are some of the stories you can tell with data. So there's reporting, there's explanatory, predictive, causation, and correlation. So just a few examples of these types of stories that you can tell. So I think this is actually a really good example of storytelling with data, which is Spotify. So at the end of the year, Spotify sends you a Spotify Wrapped, and then you're able to see what type of music you were listening to, if your genre changed over the course of the year. So it's actually quite insightful. So we talked about the importance of addressing the audience. We talked about the importance of looking at credibility and validation for your data. Let's talk now about the next steps that you can follow when crafting a presentation. So I'm a content person, I like formulas, and I'm going to share an outline that I like to use when crafting a presentation. So, if you want to take a photo of this screen or you want to screenshot this, that's totally fine. This is really a good starting place to help create the content of your presentation, and we're going to flesh these out. I have a quote here from Tom Davenport, and he's a professor of information technology and management down in the States. And he says that narrative is the way we simplify and make sense of a complex world. It supplies context, insight, interpretation, all the things that make data meaningful and analytics more relevant and interesting. So let's look at how to turn that data piece and that storytelling piece into a compelling narrative. So firstly, what story are you trying to tell? So earlier we had talked about 3 to 5 takeaways that you want your audience to remember. So really drill that down. Be very clear about what those takeaways are before you start crafting your presentation. Ask yourself, what are you trying to explain? What are your goals? And if the audience had to summarize your presentation in a few sentences, what would they say? And lastly, what context is relevant? Next, who are the characters? So it doesn't necessarily need to be a specific person, but it has to be key players or stakeholders. So I have some examples here, whether it's people, like your users, hardware, software, services, maybe it's the cloud, maybe it's the security system, maybe it's the data center or the network, but just different stakeholders that are involved in the hero's journey or involved in that story. And who is the audience rooting for? Is also a really good question to ask. Next, what is the conflict? So you want to describe the root issue, and if there's data points that require attention, action, or change from the audience, then you're able to elucidate that. Are there aha moments? And I'm going to come back to this. Are there aha moments that you want to draw attention to? And then lastly, what is the proposed solution? So how can the problem be solved? Are there actionable steps that need to be taken? What will be gained? And you want full alignment as you walk through all of this. And I'm going to share a little bit more about that here on the next slide. So based on the data, it's important to present the solution and ask, what are we trying to achieve? So in terms of best practices, let's say you're crafting this presentation, you've looked at those 4 components, you've addressed the audience question, you've looked at the data. Now you want to know, what are some of the best practices I can follow when creating a presentation? You want to be able to identify these aha moments. So instead of a data dump, you want key takeaways with respect to your data. Is there anything that surprises you? Is there something that the audience needs to know? And these can be the inflection points or pivot points during your presentation. And along those lines, you can transform those aha moments into engaging transitions. So that will lead to a deeper analysis. And I have some examples here. So these are some phrases that you can use. Once again, if you want to screenshot this or take a photo, that's totally fine. This presentation will also be recorded and uploaded to YouTube, so you'll be able to watch it later. But you'll just highlight some of these words here. So there's a pattern, correlation, trends, comparisons, outliers. Those are the sorts of aha moments that might lead to an interesting inflection point or pivot point. You want to keep your presentation simple and easy to follow. You want to avoid these data-heavy slides. As an audience member, in order to be engaged, there's an interplay between what is and what could be. And when you get to the end of the presentation, there should be full alignment. So what I mean by this is you want to avoid what's called the great reveal. So in the past, I think this was a little bit more popular, and you would present all of your data, you would present all of the information, and you'd kind of string the audience along. And then at the end, there would be a surprising take-home message, or there would be some sort of twist at the end. And that's really not the best way in my books with regards to a presentation. I think that style of the great reveal works less and less in today's landscape. As I mentioned, the audience is busy, they're multitasking. So you want to be able to speak simply, have the dots being connected in an easy to follow way, and just really have that overarching theme of simplicity in your presentation. Yeah, so avoid the great reveal. And then lastly, consider how you will visualize data. And I've actually written an article about this. It's on my website. So if you want some pointers, you can take a look at my website and there's some information about that. So in summary, we've looked at who is the audience, is your data valid, what type of story do you want to tell, who are the characters, what is the conflict, what's the proposed solution, and what are these aha moments or inflection points that you want to highlight? And then lastly, how will you visualize your data? So I hope this has been, an insightful crash course, 20-minute crash course into storytelling and data. These are the references and articles that I had used. And I want to highlight that if you want to improve your ability to persuade, communicate, and present, I have what's called the 2-minute screen on my website. So you can go on my website, you can upload a video of you presenting, speaking about anything, and I will respond with constructive feedback. There's no obligation to work with me further, but it will help you, in terms of your ability to communicate and present. So just want to share that. And if you are interested in public speaking coaching, communication coaching services, conflict resolution workshops, please be in touch. So I'm going to open up the chat box here. And if you have any questions, you can go ahead and pop that in the chat box now. Oh, it looks like I lost audio. Okay, so glad to hear that it's back. Hopefully, if you're able to watch the recording, then you can catch the bits that were missed. Does anybody have any questions that they want to ask? I'll give another moment or so if you want to come off mute and ask questions. Now is the time.